Pete, here we are at the Hollywood Museum, standing in front of the display of Star Wars. Ta-da! As we know, one of the two sci-fi movies nominated for Best Picture, the other one being E.T.
Yes.
Let's turn the clock back a little bit to 1977. When this was up for Best Picture, Annie Hall beat it.
Annie Hall, you know, it was an interesting year because you had this big, giant blockbuster, Star Wars, and this very small Woody Allen movie. And it's sort of similar this year in some ways to what we're looking at with, with Avatar versus the Hurt Locker. In fact, Woody Allen's picture, Annie Hall, has been the lowest grossing Best Picture winner of the last 40 years until we get to Hurt Locker, if that wins. Anyway, Star Wars, 1977, it seemed unbeatable except for one fact. Sci-Fi had never been nominated or really accepted by the Academy. I think they always looked down on it, as I think they still do, really, as an invention of 50s, you know, drive-in double bills and things. And
there was the other big sci-fi movie that year, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which wasn't even nominated.
Yes, it got 8 Academy Award nominations and did quite well, and it must have come close to a Best Picture nomination. But no, it wasn't nominated. It was Star Wars. It had 10 nominations. The interesting thing is Star Wars, as the award ceremony went on, was just, you heard that theme all night long. It was another win for Star Wars. It was another win. It won 7 Oscars, but they were all these technical awards leading up to the big categories of directing and writing and picture. And then, of course, Annie Hall took over, winning all those awards very late in the evening.
And what was strange about that is that Annie Hall had been released so early the previous year in 77, and it only got on the awards map when the National Society of Film Critics named it Best Picture in early December, and everyone, oh yeah, I remember that.
Well, I actually think it got on the awards map because it was the very first movie that I remember, at least, going on in L.A. on something called the Z Channel.
Yeah,
and they
right.
took it, and you know, this was before it was out on tape, or before, you know, this is during its theatrical run, so-called, and they took it, and you could suddenly see Annie Hall on your little cable TV things. This was early in that whole world. And Annie Hall was really the first example of what now leads to DVD screeners and things that the Academy lives and breathes by. So I think that was an interesting turning point, in addition to the critical support that it got from the critics groups, was that people could see it in their homes. And you know, so many of the Academy are shut-ins. They don't go out. They're older. They didn't see these smaller independent movies. They didn't see them. And so it always favored these bigger pictures. And because, you know, quite frankly, even though Annie Hall came out in April, Star Wars came out in May. But Star Wars played all year long and was the biggest movie of all time. So it was that thing it had going for it. So it was an interesting matchup. And then, you know, you had another sci-fi movie a few years later with E.T., right?
And that was one of the criminal decisions of Oscar voters of all time, because they went with Gandhi over E.T. for Best Picture.
Well, here it is.
On.
I mean, Gandhi it was the old Academy style. Richard Attenborough and everything. It also came out late in the year, whereas E.T. had come out in June, and everybody was saying E.T.'s finally going to be the first sci-fi, fantasy, whatever you want to call it.
It won the Golden Globe that year. It had all this momentum.
It was going to be Spielberg's Oscar at that point. I remember making bets with people. I even wrote it down. I carried it around in my wallet for 6 months saying, E.T. will win Best Picture, Best Director. Of course, got sidelined right at the end by this kind of stuffy epic that, you know, look at those two movies today. What do you remember?
Of course, of course. And this bias that we're talking about, which brings us back to Avatar this year, and can it really win Best Picture? When you talk about the bias historically, these are some of the great sci-fi movies never nominated for Best Picture. 2001: A Space Odyssey, Planet of the Apes, Jurassic Park, Blade Runner, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and War of the Worlds.
It's pretty amazing. You know, not even the remake of War of the Worlds.
Which I kind of liked.
But, you know, it's amazing when you think of it that this year we have 2 sci-fi movies in the Best Picture category. Of course, we have 10 slots. But nevertheless, there's 2. One of those extra slots went to District 9, a terrific movie that's part parody, part sci-fi, and all good. Really, really good and smart. And the critics like that, too. I think the key is to get critical support and also be a very successful film in the genre. Something that happened with a third film we thought might have gotten in this year but has never been nominated in the past in as many incarnations is Star Trek.
That's right. And here at the Hollywood Museum, we're standing in front of a costume from the very first Star Trek movie, which was also snubbed. By the way, Pete, speaking of District 9, I think that really is E.T. all over again. It's, once again, a story of reptilian space aliens who we won't let go home. So maybe it can win this year and make up for the other loss of E.T. before.
Well, don't count on it.
I'm not. Thanks, Pete.